That CNN lawsuit against White House reporter Jim Acosta from CNN. The White House revoked his press pass, you'll remember, and a judge is ruling in favor of Jim Acosta and CNN. And the judge there is saying that the fact that CNN has other pass holders does not make the harm to Acosta any less irreparable. The judge is saying that the whole thing about Acosta placing the hands on the intern was of questionable accuracy. The judge also went on to criticize the government's defense of its procedures in revoking Acosta's press pass. I'm looking down because this is just coming in to our newsroom right here. The federal judge, Timothy Kelly, in this case, says, quote, "I will grant the application for the temporary restraining order. I order the government reinstate Jim Acosta's press pass." So the hearing is still ongoing, but that, of course, just coming down, and we wanted to make sure that we brought that to you.
Fox News had joined CNN in protesting the administration's actions on freedom of the press grounds. And so now the judge is saying that he will grant the application for a temporary restraining order, forcing the White House, in effect, to give Jim Acosta his press pass back. The hearing is still ongoing, as Sandra mentioned, saying that the harm to freedom of the press outweighs the government's need for an orderly press conference. So that seems to be the judge's main thinking as to why he's granting Jim Acosta and CNN his White House pass back.
All right, so the judge has ordered that the White House return the press pass of Jim Acosta. This just coming into our newsroom. As we get more on this, we will bring that to you. We've just gotten this breaking news, and this judge has now ruled that the White House must immediately return the press credentials of CNN's Jim Acosta. I want to get your thoughts as we continue to learn more out of that courtroom.
Well, first of all, I think it's not at all a done deal. This will probably go to the Supreme Court. I mean, this is a key issue of separation of powers, whether the judiciary has the right to tell the executive how to run its own press office. I mean, it may, if it rises, if there's some interpretation of the First Amendment that would transcend any kind of individual rights that the executive has to decide who gets in and who gets out. I do think it'll go to a higher court.
There are a limited number of seats in the White House press room, the Brady briefing room, 44 seats, I think, something like that. So the White House does have an argument that they get to limit who is in there, but do you get to limit somebody just because?
Well, I think what could also be problematic.
Hang on just a second. The lawyers for CNN are coming out, and let's listen in.
Great day for the First Amendment in journalism. We're very excited to have Mr. Acosta be able to go back and get his hard pass and report the news about the White House. I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay. Everybody, thanks for coming. I just want to say something very briefly, and that is I want to thank all of my colleagues in the press who supported us this week. And I want to thank the judge for the decision he made today. And let's go back to work. Thank you.
Thank you.
When do you expect to get whether or not we think the likelihood?
If you are a little befuddled as to what this is all about, there was a White House press conference right after the election during which the president was speaking. Jim Acosta from CNN got in a very heated exchange with him. A White House intern tried to take away the microphone, and there was a little bit of an altercation. The White House said that he actually placed his hands on the intern. That's open to interpretation. Some saw it as such. Some say it was overblown. But the White House pulled his press pass. Now he's getting it back, according to this ruling from a federal judge.
And you'll remember that Fox News came out in support of CNN. Passes for working White House journalists should never be weaponized. A little bit more about what we're learning here in this judge. Judge Kelly ordering the government to return the press pass of Jim Acosta. Our reporter, Jake Gibson, telling us that both sides will submit a written status report by Monday, and we may see this in court again next week if the government wants to continue the fight. But for now, the temporary restraining order has been granted by Judge Kelly, and he ordered the government to return Acosta's hard pass. Want to get your thoughts?
Well, again, it's a question of how much the White House wants to push this. I think it would make a very interesting Supreme Court case to see whether the First Amendment goes far enough so that they can order the White House to decide who gets a press pass and who doesn't. They may decide to just say, the heck with it. We made our point. The world has seen what Acosta did, and we'll give back the press pass. Let's hope that this thing doesn't go on much longer, because I don't think America has the stomach for either one side or the other necessarily in this issue.
But I'm just reading headlines as it's breaking, but this is a Trump-appointed judge. It's an emergency stay, so as we've been saying, it's far from over. This is not the end of it. But I do think what could be problematic for the administration, if they choose to fight it, is the reaction, the aftermath of taking Acosta's press pass away. Some of the comments the president made seemed to indicate that he took his press pass away because he didn't like the questions, he didn't like the coverage. But originally, the White House said it was about that kerfluffle with the microphone. So that could be problematic.
And my attitude is, looking above this, let's move on to the real issues facing our country. I mean, I think he ought to go back to work.
The press covering the president that's real issues.
It is the real issue. But what happened with him, the intern, what Trump said, frankly, that's inside baseball to me as the only non-journalist here. I'm much more concerned that we address the real issues, the trade embargo, the debt, the deficit, health care, immigration. Rather talk about those than Jim Acosta, frankly.
Our A-team today. Doug Schoen. David, first-timer Doug Schoen.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
David Asman, Shelby Holiday.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sean Spicer is a former White House press secretary and a senior advisor for America First Action PAC, and he joins us now. Sean, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you, Sandra.
All right, I want to get to this news that we had breaking in the last hour, Sean, on this judge handing CNN a victory in this bid to restore Jim Acosta's White House press pass. We are just now getting a bit of a statement here from the White House. I want to first get your reaction. I'm going to take a look at this. But get your reaction first to Judge Timothy Kelly ruling that Acosta's First Amendment rights overruled the White House's right to have orderly press conferences.
Well, look, I'm no lawyer, but I'm a little shocked in the sense that I think that there's nothing that prohibited Mr. Acosta from writing on the White House's actions. He was free to continue to write. CNN had multiple reporters that had access to the White House. But I think there's a line between saying that the First Amendment guarantees you to go anywhere and do anything you want and to have reasonable expectations, as the White House has asked for, with respect to his level of professionalism and behavior. And that's what this is about. Obviously, whether he has access or not, he, like so many other journalists around this country, can write about the White House or any subject that they deem necessary or of interest. So I think there's a difference, and I think we're getting lost in grouping every single discussion into the First Amendment. The First Amendment doesn't give you free access to go wherever you please. It gives you the ability to express yourself, for a free press to write things uninhibited, for Congress not to abridge the ability of that press to conduct itself.
Sean, let me just get you to some of the argument here, because we're going to run out of time, and I think it's important to get this in here. The judge, which, by the way, I want to point out was a Trump appointee. He was appointed last year, bipartisan support in the Senate. He also agreed with CNN's argument that the White House did not provide due process. He said that the White House decision-making was so shrouded, and I'm quoting him, shrouded in mystery that the government could not tell me who made the decision. And before I move on, I want to get in the statement from the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, at the White House, is now responding. Today, the court made clear that there is no absolute First Amendment right to access the White House. In response to the court, we will temporarily reinstate the reporter's hard pass. We will also further develop rules and processes to ensure fair and orderly press conferences in the future. There must be decorum at the White House. Do you have any idea what changes they might have in store?
Well, look, here's the answer. I actually believe, as press secretary, I was very liberal with handing out passes to the White House. I believe in a fair and free, robust press, but I think that there should be some level of agreed-upon decorum and professionalism. That is something that bodes well for journalism. It bodes well for just civil discourse, and I don't think that that has anything to do with being able to ask tough questions. There's a difference between to ask what you want and behavior that I think is over the line, disrespectful to the office of the the president.
Before I
And
let you
think
go,
that
do you have any idea what Sarah Sanders might be referencing here? Was that ever discussed when you were at the White House? Further develop rules and processes to ensure fair and orderly press conferences in the future? What I mean, do you have any?
No, but I think it may go to the judge's point, which is that there has to be some way of saying if you violate this, then this is how it will be dealt with. If we all need to agree to the certain protocols that will exist, in terms of handing off the microphone, et cetera. I think that it behooves all of us at this point, it's sad to say, to actually get some of this down in writing as far as how things will be dealt with if there's concerns, but also an agreed upon set of protocols and behavior that journalists will agree to abide by. That doesn't mean that their questions can get filtered or censored or anything, but I think that there is a level of decorum that is afforded to the office of the presidency that maybe that they can sit down and work with the White House Correspondents Association to come to some agreement as to what that would look like and to have some sort of agreed upon resolution dispute system.
Did you agree with the White House's decision to revoke the pass in the first place?
I think that it would have been better to sit down with the White House Correspondents Association to point out why this behavior is not only disrespectful to the President of the United States, but also to fellow journalists, and see if there could have been some resolution to how to address it, specifically with Mr. Acosta, and then generally going forward. I would have thought that would have been a better way to keep things, to keep the temperature from getting as high as it did. But again, I think it's hard to make that decision from where I sit, and not having been in the day-to-day as Sarah and some of the others were. Right. So it's easy to say these things without having the context of what had happened before, after, or the preceding days. But I think there's no question that Mr. Acosta's behavior is both disrespectful to the White House and disrespectful to his colleagues, it's not about him having his own show when he's at these press conferences. It's about all of the reporters being able to have an opportunity.
We'll see what happens next. Sean Spicer, thank you for coming on the program.
You bet, Sandra.
All right. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.